Okay, so we will settle in for the Dharma talk this evening. Our topic is on the koshas as a model for human living and human potential. I would also like to pose it as a model for facing the climate catastrophe through the lens of the koshas. What can we do? How can we approach this? What resources might we need? What resources do we already have within us? How can we collaborate and really face the dilemma as a community versus feeling simply overwhelmed or wanting to be in denial or practice forgetfulness when actually the climate, the society, the ecology need us to remember. So let's take a comfortable seat for a few minutes here. You can rest your hands in your lap. You're welcome to close your eyes. And allow yourself to arrive. Not only that you've taken your physical seat, but you can inhabit your seat, embody yourself. Welcome your breathing to bring you here to the present. You might even picture the breath like a gentle hot air balloon, and it's about to land you in the present moment, in a very comfortable landing as you exhale and arrive. And with each exhale over the next several minutes, I'm going to ask you to picture that sense of arriving, arriving, arriving. As it is said in our teachings, the only moment we have is the present moment. And yet it seems so elusive. And as you exhale, imagine the sense of arriving, arriving, arriving right here. Notice as you're arriving, what are you setting down in order to be here? As you arrive, what do you kind of disembark from your mind or your body? And if there's any sense of holding anywhere in your physical body or also in your mind, you could imagine setting that aside, putting it down, or disembarking it from your body or from your mind. For some of that which we carry, we might have to request that it lean back a little bit or give us some space. Like perhaps a certain noisy broadcast in your mind, you may have to ask if it'd be willing to quiet down for the next hour, or if it would be willing to grant you the space to be here less encumbered and more present. And if you imagine that which you are setting aside or that which you are disembarking, imagine it a bit like when there is static on a radio broadcast. It's hard to hear clearly what wants to come through. So let's imagine now that the static is sort of fading and your mind can become more and more clear. And your body more and more present. And then please raise your hands to your heart. Acknowledge your efforts to be here. Not only that you're here physically, but also in your whole self. And you may bow your head to your heart. Please release your hands when you're ready to and open your eyes. It's nice to see you and to take in your presence here, even in a Zoom room. I always feel very committed to and moved by the model of the koshas, and I find it to be so liberating for us to really understand like the human organism in the ecology. So we never are separate from the ecology. When I speak about the koshas, we're going to be talking about the layers of our human organism, but that is held within a larger sense of koshas or layers, like earth, water, fire, air, and ether. The other reason I feel very committed to and also poignant about the koshas, which I've been discussing for more than 25 years, it's a really helpful model for understanding where the static lives in us. Very helpful for understanding how trauma has influenced us and how many layers of misperception trauma can create in us. That misperception then makes it difficult for us to clearly see others or to clearly see ourselves. And after the numbers of generations of people, humans inhabiting the planet, and the numbers of ways in which trauma has been experienced, right now we have this massive human and ecological dilemma that we cannot see ourselves clearly, and we don't see others clearly. The word for not seeing ourselves clearly is called avidya. It means we don't know our deepest nature. It is also the same word when we don't see others clearly. We're in avidya. We're not seeing them clearly. Because this is so deep in the human condition, this thing called avidya, because it's so pervasive and so common and so deep, it's not actually recognized as part of the dilemma. And yet we were born in this particular era from generations back of people having avidya, living in the condition of not knowing their deepest nature, nor knowing the deepest nature of others. So we can consider one generation before us, a generation before, a generation before, that people have not been able to see clearly who we are as beings. And therefore we haven't seen each other clearly. And I want to say that because when I talk about the koshas and I talk about how you were seen or not seen in your earliest life, I'd like you to consider that the capacity for others to see you clearly was burdened by the extent to which they were not seen clearly and the extent to which society doesn't want people to see clearly. You know, the powers that be, particularly in our capitalistic society, if people see themselves clearly, they become less good consumers. They aren't so much interested in merchant culture. So when I discuss this, I'm going to ask you to consider your earliest care environment, your earliest care providing people, and to consider the community that they're a part of, the families that they came from, and to think of it as ripples upon ripples upon ripples of people not being seen clearly and being unable to know how to eradicate that or to shift that. I find in the 30 plus years of work I've been doing in the mental health field, including with just general public citizens like yourselves, and also drug and alcohol rehab in Oregon's prison system, so many settings that I've been in, I find that over these 30 years, very, very few people had the experience of being seen clearly or cherished and nurtured in such a way as they came out of their earliest life unencumbered. I have yet to meet somebody who's not encumbered. And it's possibly the case that because I've chosen to work in certain settings, particularly with people who've experienced marginalization and difficulties or addiction, because I've chosen these communities to work in, because I come from this community as well, particularly trauma and addiction. That's why I don't meet people who are unencumbered, perhaps. But on the other hand, I've also lived at Brighton Bush Hot Springs, and I've been in spiritual communities for 30 years. I've been in Dharma communities, yoga communities, you know, I've been in a lot of auspicious places too. And still I have yet to meet people who are unencumbered. So in a way, we could say that the practice of yoga, this entire path, is one of becoming less encumbered. We want to be more and more unencumbered, right? To be more free. So all of that to say that when we look at this model of the koshas, it gives us such a beautiful image and a pathway. It's not just like a paradigm, it's a path inside the koshas. And for me, it's a powerful path for how will I live? How will I take care of myself? How do I choose to see others? How do I unburden that which is blocking me from being the best version of myself? And then how am I also participating in society? What can I see as my contribution in society? So in the model of the koshas, I'm going to describe this from the outside in, and then I'm going to describe it from the inside out, because actually the center of the koshas, the word for that is called Ananda Maya Kosha. And that center is considered to be the only causal kosha. The word causal is spelled C-A-U-S-A-L, causal. When I was first studying yoga, this tells you a bit about my history and how young I was, and that I had books to read, but I didn't really have teachers. So I was studying the koshas, and I thought that the center was casual. The same letters, but I mixed them up. I thought it was a casual experience. So I didn't hear the word causal because nobody said it out loud. I was reading it in a book and I didn't know the word causal. I hadn't come across the word yet. So to me, the innermost experience of the koshas for some time was casual. And that had a kind of a cool interpretation for a while. Like you could just be casual about this thing called Ananda. And in the time that I was discovering the koshas, I was getting into my recovery from my addiction. And I had this shocking realization along the path of my recovery. And the realization was this: as often as I felt that I was suffering and really like despairing and dark and heavy, there were these little glimpses that would come to me of joy, like unexplainable happiness and bliss would come. I couldn't place it on anything. I was becoming less addicted to my particular addiction of choice. There was some freedom coming, and I would have this like unconditional bliss. And I thought, oh, that's so wonderful to have that. When is it going to crash? When is it going to fall to pieces? When is the other shoe going to drop? So I had this experience of intermittently being in wonder and awe. And one day I realized that joy and wonder and awe was not coming and going. I was. It was not coming and going. I was the one that was coming and going. And that was a significant realization to come to that. Right. So what is Ananda at the very center of this model? It is that which is abiding. It is ever present. It is infinite. It is not coming and going. It is not rising and fading. It's not passing. So Ananda is the central love. And we are comprised of that. So that is at the very center of this model. And I will describe it from the center outwards, but I'm going to start from the outer to the inner. So keeping in mind that I'm describing this, we are Westerners in a Western culture, and I'm going to describe it as I learned it as a Westerner, but then I'm going to describe it more from the Eastern view as well. So the outermost layer of the koshas, we call Anna Maya Kosha. And the word Anna means food. So in this case, the outermost experience is the food body, the body that is food. I always like to say, you know that your body is food for other species if you get a mosquito bite. You're like, heck, I do not want to be bit by a mosquito, but better a mosquito than a bear. However, you are a part of the food chain. So the body that's comprised of food is the musculoskeletal body. This thing we call Annamaya Kosha is the physical body, the one that most of us associate with as, this is me. We identify with our bodies. But few people take good care of their Annamaya Kosha. So we say in Ayurveda, the food you eat is the food you become. So listen to that carefully. The food you eat is the food you become. Some people like to say also what you eat is, that determines your mood and your mind, your health, of course, all these things. You are what you eat is a phrase people say as well. So the Annamaya Kosha is asking us to take good care of, to have this respectful relationship with the preciousness of having a physical body that is temporary. It is finite, and that's not news to you. You know it, of course. We saw it on a massive scale during the global pandemic. Okay, so the Annamaya Kosha is our responsibility to care for with our daily routine, how we eat, how we rest, how we exercise, how we sleep, how we hydrate, my example. So it has a very important role in our lives. And as we're practicing those things in our daily routine, we're learning about self-care and self-discipline, self-nurturance. So if we've been dismissing the importance of caring for our physical body, that is an important place to begin this journey. If we've been dismissing the importance of caring for this because it seems like we can disregard it and we don't have too many symptoms right now, what we know is that disregarding is a symptom in itself. The ability to disregard is a symptom that will create more and more difficult symptoms for the physical body and also for the mental body as time goes on. So let's consider the Annamaya Kosha as we start there. It is our first practice ground. For many people, asana is associated with the Annamaya Kosha. For many people, it is their first introduction to yoga, is practicing asana. And then realizing their body feels so much better. Somehow the body feels lighter, and more vital, less friction. Somehow feels almost radiant and relaxed. And where did that come from? How did it happen? So if the physical body is capable of that kind of revival every time we practice yoga, we want to make that commitment because we're being shown a glimpse of that ananda. When we touch those really deeply relaxed places in yoga, we're having a glimpse of the ananda. So the Annamaya Kosha is considered the most dense of the physical body, of the koshas, the layers of the koshas, and therefore, interesting for me to say this, as I was just saying, practice your asana, it gives you such a glimpse. But the Annamaya Kosha is called the least likely to change. It is the least capable of transformation. So if you think about how transformed you feel from a physical asana practice, imagine the levels of transformation that can go deeper as you go deeper into the koshas. Right? So the next layer in is considered the dense and subtle body. And the transformation that happens here is considered to be more powerful. So this is called the Pancha Maya Kosha. So we have Annamaya and then Pranamaya. The Pancha Maya Kosha, we hear the word prana, means energy or life force. You could think of it as vitality. So in this case, the energy body is your respiration, innervation, but also the subtle body, the chakras, the doshas, the vayus, these subtle realms of yoga that are so medicinally powerful. They are in the Pranamaya Kosha. They're always affecting and influencing the Annamaya Kosha. It's a two-way direction. It's bilateral direction. So with the Pranamaya Kosha, and I love what Camille said earlier in her check-in, she's not watching the news and she doesn't have social media. With the Pranamaya Kosha, in a similar way as Annamaya Kosha, physical body, how am I eating? How am I sleeping? When am I waking? What is my exercise? How do I care for my posture? Do I have a practice of tending to my physical body in a way that nourishes it? Pranamaya Kosha, what am I exposing my senses to? What is coming in through my ears, through my eyes, through my mouth? You know, what am I, my nose, what am I seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, touching? What are my senses exposed to every day? Our senses are a gateway to the deep parts of the brain. Very influential. This gateway, what happens with the senses is they come through the thalamus and they're sent into the amygdala and the hippocampus to interpret what the senses are about. And if our amygdala and hippocampus have had to be primed in a way to interpret for the bias of stress, danger, or threat, then when sensory stimulus comes in, it can go quickly to that bias. Danger, threat, stress, called the negativity bias. So if the amygdala and the hippocampus have that programming due to things like adversity, trauma, marginalization, pain, suffering, if they're primed that way, the negativity bias is always faster acting anyhow. But imagine now that it's primed to be a little quicker in that direction. Our senses are a place that we can shift the needle on that radar screen. We can move it on the dial. So we could use our senses to nourish our brain. So I like to say, listening to that which is really nourishing, soothing. It reflects the hum of the universe, which may be something like listening to, in my case, like chanting, or I do love classical Indian music, listening to nature, listening to someone just noodling on their guitar, finding their way, listening to life as it's happening versus too much static from mental broadcasts of your own or from social media, or too much news or too many influences from those other realms. What are we seeing? What do we spend time looking at? Is nature involved? Or is it mostly computer screens and devices and cement in the city? Are we looking mostly at buildings and pollution and so on? Or do we give our eyes a chance to see also that which is beautiful, that which is natural? In that case, seeing both that which is blooming and that which is composting. We're not limiting it to just what is beautiful by some photographic standard. What am I smelling? So what spices do I cook with? What are the fragrances in my environment? And what promotes, smell is one of the fastest acting of the senses. So what promotes your mind to feel peaceful or connected? Essential oils can be very helpful in this way. Giving yourself a way to nourish your brain through your senses. It's not too hard to have a little bottle of essential oils that you smell to bring yourself back into the present. And they say it's the fastest of the senses. So I want to encourage you. It's kind of a lesser involved sense for most people, because seeing and hearing and tasting and touching is so much more involved. But if you can remember to use fragrance to bring your brain back to the present, it's really powerful. And then what am I tasting? Am I really truly tasting the food? Am I choosing foods that have chemicals? So I'm tasting processed or chemicalized food? Or am I choosing foods that come more in their whole form and really tasting, as Thich Nhat Hanh would say, the sunshine, soil, and rain? I'm tasting the heat, the light, the darkness, the ground, the water, the rain. I'm tasting this thing that grew. It grew in a world that is habitable for my species and for me. So am I really tasting it? Or am I over flavoring things because my taste buds have been dulled by perhaps cigarettes or coffee or things that dull your taste buds? And think, oh, I really can't taste. I need more salt or more flavor, right? Trying to get the taste. And of course, I come from a history with food addiction and eating disorder behaviors. So also, how am I using flavor, taste, comfort foods, memories, and so on to try to quiet my brain? Not for tranquility, but for numbness. What am I doing there? Right. So we ask these questions at the Pancha Maya Kosha. We want to know, how am I treating my senses, but also my nervous system, respiration, digestion, innervation? How am I doing? So you can see there's kind of a roadmap for this intentional self-care. And for lots of people, starting with their senses is too subtle. So, oh, let's take care of your senses. And they come for yoga therapy and they're like, I have back pain and I want that to go away. How is smelling that essential oil going to help my back pain go away? They don't see the connection to it, of course, immediately. So we always meet yoga students, whether they're in a public class or a yoga therapy session, we meet them with the needs that they're coming in with and where we can have a connection. So we care for the physical body, but we know that the energy body, the Pancha Maya Kosha, is more powerful for transformation. And since it's a bilateral experience, if I tend to the Pancha Maya Kosha, the Annamaya Kosha starts to feel better. It truly does. And we can use yoga asana, of course, to prepare us for pranayama, which is the practice most associated with the Pancha Maya Kosha. And as your body gets through a certain amount of asana and the friction or the residue or the density of the physical body is less and less, as we have good sleep and good digestion and good food choices and all the wholesome, auspicious things, when we come to pranayama practice, you're just like soaring. It's amazing where we can go with pranayama. But if our physical body is under kind of daily assault from our own mental broadcasts and then the toxic nature of our society on the outside, if our physical body is carrying the tension of both our own trauma history and intergenerational trauma history, if it's compacted with all of that stuff, we're probably using asana and pranayama just to make it through the day, just to get through one more stressful moment. In this way, we think of maybe asana and pranayama as medicine, as like an intervention for a time, just lifting a burden off. And that's totally wonderful. But let's also imagine the depth that it can take us if we are able to have the Annamaya Kosha and the Pranamaya Kosha get more and more balanced. The depth that it can take us to is, it's hard to imagine when you first start. In fact, I sometimes say if people did imagine it, they might not start. They might be like, whoa, how will I live like that? Oh my God. And then it's inconceivable. So they might not take it up. I actually have a memory that I will share with you because I'm going to talk about the Mana Maya Kosha next, and it holds our memories. So 2 memories just came up for me. And one of them was, I was on my first silent meditation retreat for 10 days. I was 19 years old. I was suffering so much in my life. And I met this person who had this brochure with some trees on it. And it said Insight Meditation Society on it. This was in Massachusetts, where Clara's from. And so he talked me into, he was at this tea shop in Harvard Square that I used to go to. And he talked me into going to this place for a 10-day silent meditation retreat. I never even had 1 day of silence. When I showed up for this retreat, I was like so excited to be there, so relieved to be there. I had big ideas of how relaxing it was going to be. It was going to finally be so helpful and so soothing, and I wouldn't be suffering. It was torture. I mean, for days. It was like I was falling asleep on my cushion. I was only 19, and everybody around me was pretty much older. And they, now that I'm an older person, I think they probably had more stress in their life or more life behind them, and they were parenting and all these things. And I was a 19-year-old college student. I was stressed for my good reasons. I was falling asleep on my cushion. My knees hurt, my hips hurt, my back hurt, couldn't sleep well at night. It was hard to poop because the food was different and you didn't have that much exercise. And so, like, in every way, I was really uncomfortable. And somewhere around day 6, I was like, whoa, I love this. Wow, this is amazing. I was having the arc of the high on the silent meditation retreat. Somewhere around day 7, I was like, how will I live like this? This is amazing. And I got my time to talk to the teacher. It's called the Dharma interview with the teacher. And I was like, how am I going to live like this? I said to the teacher. I don't recall the teacher's answer. I just remember feeling like the teacher was like so awakened as a person, so auspicious and elevated, to use somebody else's word from earlier this evening. And all the words I could get out were, how am I going to live like this? And just like stunned silence. I had no concept of it. By day 9, I was suffering again, and it was going to end on the 10th. So I was like, oh, my psyche won't let me take this home. I'm suffering. I was suffering again. I became very self-preoccupied on day 9. And I became extremely self-preoccupied with my eating disorder because I went to the retreat with my eating disorder, and sure enough, she was going home with me. And so I went with a lot of experience. I felt something very powerful. I was magnetically compelled to continue this kind of practice and to make an effort, but I wasn't like freed from my first glimpse of how could you live in this expansiveness. I had hard work ahead of me, and I was willing to do it because I had this glimpse of ease. I don't recall at all what the teacher said to me in my little interviews, but I recall that they were strangely kind. And I had not experienced kindness from my family of origin or the family that surrounded that family, from my own internal dialogue, from the pressures in my sports experiences as a kid. I hadn't experienced this like kindness for no reason. It was this unconditional kindness from these teachers. And they seemed to shower it upon everybody. So those things went with me from the retreat, and it made a little impression in my mind. The Pancha Maya Kosha is the mind. The second memory that came to me a few minutes ago was that following those retreats, which I did regularly then, and completing my graduate school studies, I went backpacking around the country by myself. And by this time I had a yoga practice, a physical yoga practice and a meditation practice. And I was compelled to go to the Canyon de Chelly. It's in Arizona. Do you know where the Canyon de Chelly is? Some of you have heard of it. Okay, so some yes and some no. The Canyon de Chelly is a deep canyon, similar to the Grand Canyon, but more intimate. And it's in the walls of the canyon that the Anasazi Indians are living. It's still living there when I was there. And I'd seen so many photographs. I went to art school and art therapy school. So I have a master's in art therapy and counseling. Before that, I went to art school. Many photographs of the Canyon de Chelly. So I was so honored to go and finally see this place that I'd only seen in photographs. And as I was driving there, I could feel like this haunting, like I'm getting closer, I'm getting closer. I'm almost to the canyon. I parked the car and I walked down the path, and I could feel like this enormous, palpable energy from this canyon. I walked over to where you could see down into the canyon. It went in both directions where I was standing. It went for a long way, winding. You could sense moving like that. And the energy in the canyon was so mystical and powerful, so sacred. I had this impulse just to lean over the edge and give in to it, which also terrified me. So I backed away from the edge of where I was standing to lie on my stomach, to look over the edge of the canyon, to soak it in, because I was afraid that I actually would just roll into it, feeling this enormous, like spiritual surrender to the energies in this canyon. And some part of my brain, of course, knew that that was not recommended if I wanted to go on living. So I laid there on my stomach looking out at the canyon. These tourists would come by chatting and taking pictures. These were old cameras, you know, the kind. They didn't get a picture right away. They had to take it back to their house and get it produced in the camera shop. But they were just chatting away, and I was like, whoa, oh my God, how am I going to live after this moment? This sense of like being a part of everything that was, and no sense of time, and a deep sense of the sacred. So these kinds of glimpses, when they're coming through, they are piercing through what's called the Pancha Maya Kosha, the mental body, the friction, the static, the clutter of the mind. These are piercing through and calling us to come to that ananda, to come back to it, to find it as our very self, to know it as home. So when you have glimpses like that, like in Shavasana or in meditation or in love or in the garden or nature, when you get a glimpse like that, at the Pancha Maya Kosha level, I want to implore you to pause and let the glimpse take you to Anandamaya Kosha, versus having that glimpse take you out and say, how will I live in this society like this? That is a very important question, but let the glimpse go deeply to bring you home. Before your mind begins conjuring, what am I going to do now? How am I going to live like this? I'm recommending that we go deep like that because we spend so much more time in the negativity bias, which is concern and, perseveration and rumination and friction and static. We spend more time there. So if you get the benefit, the joy of a glimpse, go towards it, savor it, like cherish it to pull you back home. It's a sign that we've been away from home and we're being called back. With enough of that simmering, you will come back into society and you'll know how to live. The other thing I recommend is not trying to answer that question too soon. As Rainer Marie Rilke once said, you are so young, you are so before all beginning. And I want to beg you as much as I'm able to be patient with all that is unsolved in your heart. Do not ask the questions now, for the answers cannot be given to you. They are like books in a locked room. Do not seek now the answers. Rather, live the questions themselves. You will live your way into the answer. So he said, you are so young, so before all beginning. I want to beg you, do not seek now the answers. Be patient with all that is unresolved in your heart. Live your way into the answers. This is in his book called Letters to a Young Poet. And I quoted it close, but not precisely. So the Pancha Maya Kosha is the mental body. It's the middle of the 5 layers of the koshas. So it's a middle ring. It's more powerful than the Prana Maya Kosha, more powerful than the Annamaya Kosha, but not as powerful as Anandamaya Kosha. It's the middle layer. And here in this mental body, we store all of our sense impressions. We store the habits of the mind, the samskaras and the vasanas. We are also storing here the misperceptions that we received about ourselves. And therefore, in the Pancha Maya Kosha lives that forgetfulness, the avidya. And because of the way the Pancha Maya Kosha then generates this friction-filled barrier to going deeper. So we say when we pierce it, when it gets pierced with something, you go like, oh, I didn't have to get through the entire dense forest to see that light beam coming through the trees. I saw the light beam. So the Mana Maya Kosha is housing our history, personal and collective. And it is there that the residue of trauma is so impactful. From the Mana Maya Kosha, it tells the Prana Maya Kosha, be on alert, be vigilant, hypervigilant, or go numb, be hypovigilant, go the other way. So the Mana Maya Kosha, the residue is telling the Prana Maya Kosha, like tone it down or escalate it up. You can go up to fight or flight. You can go down to freeze, submit. But by all means, don't stop paying attention or cause yourself to go numb and be in denial. Then the Prana Maya Kosha tells the Annamaya Kosha, the physical body, to have some symptoms, cravings, aversions, symptoms, fatigue, body pain, anxiety, depression. It's coming from the mind, but moving out into the body like this. Symptoms like health problems, blood sugar changes, endocrine changes. So many ways that the body starts to carry those symptoms into what we call dis-ease or illness. And then we have a lot to work with because it's very preoccupying to have a medical or mental health dilemma. If you look at our society, that is on the rise. The amount of people who are unwell and the numbers of ways in which we can be unwell is increasing almost exponentially. And it's coming from the Mana Maya Kosha. And the Mana Maya Kosha, again, it's holding these years, decades, generations of conditioning, sense impressions, all the things. So if I were to draw that as a picture, you would see like the Annamaya Kosha is a circle on the outside, the Pranamaya Kosha is the next circle in, the next circle in is the Manamaya Kosha, and it's dense. It's like a porcupine. It's abrasive. It's dark. It's mysterious. It's hard to get to know what's going on in there. And yet it's considered more powerful than Pranamaya and Annamaya Kosha. So the work that we do to resolve at the Manamaya Kosha is really essential. The practice associated with the Manamaya Kosha is meditation. Well, how many people come to yoga class and they feel like they can meditate? No, they say they can't meditate because their mind is too busy. They'll never be able to blank their mind, in quotes. I'll never be able to blank my mind. I cannot shut my mind down. The mind, if you think of it, it is signaling all the time the pressures that the mind learned to signal. Those pressures are usually associated with survival. It might not look like it because it's maybe we think, oh, I don't want to get criticized. That's a survival mechanism. I want to do a good job, survival mechanism. I shouldn't forget my to-do list, survival mechanism. I should have done that better, survival mechanism. Self-surveillance, self-criticism, self-assessing, judging others, assessing others, it's survival. We're trying to survive as an organism. So the Manamaya Kosha, we think, oh, I can't meditate. It's too noisy in there. And this is where physical asana removes some of the burden of the physical body that it's carrying from the mind body. Pranayama clears up this communication between the mind and the body, and magically, pranayama makes it possible to meditate. And as you sit, and there's a pinhole of quiet in your mind, even that pinhole is such a relief. Like, oh, I have a pinhole of quiet. Let me focus on that. The moment you focus on it, your to-do list pops back up on the screen. You have to, oh, let me focus on the pinhole of quiet. Well, no, this is something that I used to do. And sometimes I do this now. If I wake up at night and I don't want to write something down, this is what I used to do, that thoughts would come and I would assign them one letter from the alphabet. Like if it was like, don't forget to email Joe, I'd be like, okay, Joe, don't forget Joe. Now back to quiet. And then something like, well, I forgot to get the, I don't know, milk at the grocery store. I don't buy milk, but let's say I forgot to get the milk. Okay, M, okay, J and M, keep that now, come back to meditating. And I give myself this little assignment. I was like trying to stay with it, but trying not to forget. Trying to stay with it, but trying not to forget. And we recommend when you come to meditation, to the extent possible, focus on the pinhole of quiet. If that's all you get, just focus on the pinhole of quiet until it becomes a little bigger, a little bigger, a little more long lasting, a little more relaxing to be with. You begin to crave the quietude and not the mental noise. It's very difficult at first. It can be very challenging. So I also recommend with meditation that the thoughts that are coming to harass you, intrude on you, invade on you, if they're really important, they will be there at the end of your meditation. So don't worry. They're like the, what do they call these people in India? They're selling stuff to us. In the marketplace. Now I just forgot the word for it because I have this amnesia. They're like little vendors. They're selling things like trinkets and, tourist items. So if you go, I guess you could say hawkers, but it's a little different than that, but we can go with that. If you go to the Taj Mahal, not kidding, I've had this experience 3 times because I've taken tours to India. If you go to the Taj Mahal on the way in and you even have one eyelash move towards the guy with the little trinkets that you don't want and you don't actually need them, but like one little eyelash goes in his direction, he knows it. And you're trying not to say yes and you're trying not to say no, you're trying to ignore. You cannot ignore. Ignoring is an invitation, right? So now this person has you on their radar screen and you get inside the Taj and you're like, oh, thank God I didn't buy anything. Oh, I made it through that. You go into the Taj Mahal, it's amazing, it's beautiful. It's like, can't even imagine how smooth the marble is. Even the Indians who are there are so beautifully dressed, they're taking it in often for the first time. So it's awe-moving. You go to the other side to exit the Taj Mahal. There he is, the guy with the stuff that you don't need. Still waiting. He knew when you were coming. How did he know you were coming out? He's right there. Your little eyelash told him like 3 hours ago, and there he is. So the thoughts that need you after your meditation, they'll be there. The ones that need you, the ones that want to come after you, those thoughts will be there. What's in the chat here? For the purpose of the recording, I won't read that particular chat out loud, but I understand it. Yeah. Right. So when we're meditating, we're trying to bring the mind into that place where there is the glimpse of Ananda Maya Kosha, trying to get to it. So the next phase of meditation is to actually address the samskaras. So at first, I'm recommending we just come to the quiet, but the next phase of meditation is you can name a mental habit, you could name a sensation. This is a practice that people do like in Vipassana. You're naming it, you're noting it, and so on. That is a different practice than aiming for the quietude, like sensing the quiet, listening for the space beneath, beyond, and between all thoughts. When you cultivate that, you're cultivating a witness that can then non-judgmentally name a thought or a sensation. It could name a memory, it could name a habit, and it can name those things going by. Now you have your inner witness, a capacity for quiet, a capacity for non-judgment. You have a kind of sense of the players in your mind. And then using those strengths, we turn towards a problematic thought. And we listen. We listen for what that thought thinks its purpose is, what that thought imagines it's doing for us. Why has it come? What is its sort of job title? How does it influence the Prana Maya Kosha, the energy body, and how is it influencing the Annamaya Kosha, the physical body? Turning towards those thoughts for that purposeful inquiry in yoga is called svadhyaya. And it's a more intermediate to advanced stage. In the beginning of yoga, it's really helpful to develop a foundation in that ananda, a foundation of really being able to rest in confidence that that ananda is you, that you are being called back home. Sometimes people have this idea that they'll be able to meditate once they have worked out everything on their laundry list of character flaws. Once they get that worked out, they're going to meditate really well. But that's kind of a one-directional attitude versus a bilateral directional attitude. So by bidirectional here, I mean that we're going in to touch Ananda Maya Kosha. And then from there, we're coming to touch the difficult thoughts. And wonderfully, when you recognize through Ananda Maya Kosha that which you deeply are, most of your character flaws will shrink in size and become like adorable little porcupines as they once were before their needles came up, before they got scared and became distorted parts of you. They were adorable, innocent porcupines. If you have not recently seen a baby porcupine, I recommend that you check it out on the internet because it's absolutely adorable. And you will think, oh my God, I want to pet that thing. I want to hold it and cuddle it. You know, like if your most long-held character flaw is like a porcupine and it turns into a baby porcupine because you've practiced enough meditation, you can then really address it and see that it wasn't a character flaw. It was actually a scared part of you that developed a strategy to manage the terror that didn't have enough support to be understood. And because of that, it made a strategy that became a behavior, that became a pattern, that sometimes became an addiction or a compulsion. And then it became the way you identify yourself. I am this problem, or I am this behavior. And all of that can become very congealed. It's pulling us away from home, not helping us to get back to home. So we want to be bidirectional, or this two-way kind of process where we're touching Ananda Maya Kosha, remembering our home base, and from that loving perspective, addressing what really is our work to do, the places where we do still get caught up. Addressing it from love is different than addressing it from shame and terror. We also are going to be more likely to see in others how their behaviors or adaptations, I call them sometimes, they're strategic adaptations about how to adapt to a complicated life or a painful life or painful society. We're going to start seeing how that was once unconscious, subconscious, and life-saving for them, but it stayed in its distortion and they don't know it. And so they keep believing that it's them, and they may keep behaving in those ways that are causing pain and harm to themselves and to others. But you'll start seeing that Ananda Maya Kosha lives in them too. And sometimes what you'll feel is heartbreak, that they can't or don't know it yet. When you see it, as we call that compassion, you're seeing it. We have compassion for how they can't see it or know it. And sometimes it's very helpful to place that in society. They have not been able to see it or know it because our society has broken that view repeatedly, particularly with people who are not in positions of power. Now, people in positions of power also have lost their way and have a broken view of themselves and of society. So it's very important to understand that that particular experience of the Manamaya Kosha becoming cluttered and filled with friction, it's available to anybody, any age, any part of the planet, any geographical reach. We're all susceptible to it. So the Manamaya Kosha, we want to be able to clear that as much as possible, but it doesn't need to be 100%. Because as you start having little pinholes of clarity, the light shines through more and more. And then you touch what's called Vijnanamaya Kosha, the next layer in Vijnanamaya Kosha. And what you're touching there is this wisdom, this kind of deep wisdom that is, you don't own it, you haven't authored it, you didn't come up with it, but you're remembering it, like you're returning to it. One of you said earlier today that you were raised in a very religious household, and coming to a yoga practice was a relief because there was a sense of the spiritual, but without the dogma. Vijnanamaya Kosha is like that spiritual wisdom that moves through all traditions and is what we call collective or universal. when we're touching that, when we're returning to that, we start to see the human condition in a very powerful way. In this human condition, we see how society has created the dilemmas that it's now perpetuating, and how fractions of society want to keep the same systems at play, and others want to rise up and advocate and act and bring forth what would be a better society. So we, at the Vijnana Maya Kosha and Mana Maya Kosha, we get a chance to see both personally and collectively how this is playing out. I look at my personal responsibilities in those things, and I see the collective. The Vijnana Maya Kosha could teach us so much, but I can see the collective mind is against it. And that's sometimes a very painful place to be. You can feel helpless there. It's really important to know that we are not alone. It's one reason that yoga includes practicing with a community, having a sense of the Sangha. If we sense we're facing that, like deep wisdom and shocking recognition that society is so terribly out of balance, if we feel like we're alone facing that, we can feel very easily overwhelmed and outnumbered. So really helpful to have a teacher, a Sangha, and a practice. In Buddhism, they call that the Buddha, the Dharma, and Sangha, the teacher, the teachings, and the community. In this case, I'm just being a vessel for your teacher. You might refer to me in English language as your teacher, but I'm only a vessel for that teacher that is coming through me and beyond me. And then the teachings I'm conveying that come from yoga, and we are the community together. We are the Sangha together. That Vijnana Maya Kosha, as we sense it, it quickly returns us. It's the more powerful than Annamaya, more powerful than Pranamaya, more powerful than Manomaya. It is moving us directly towards Anandamaya Kosha, which is the most powerful place to understand ourselves from. Let me pause there and see what questions are or comments. Perhaps you can see how like a little bit of self-care is putting you on a path to come in and in and into these layers of the koshas. Perhaps you'll also sense that your detours away from self-care are taking you away from home. And that might feel painful for me to vocalize it like that, but it's actually true. If you look at the roadmap of the koshas, if we can go in with this caring attitude, we are coming home. The instinct to avoid self-care is coming from a societal disconnection to the ecology and the climate and nature from each other, a societal breakdown. We're conditioned not to care, not to take good care of ourselves. We're conditioned to have fast food and chemical food and stressful lives and all the things. But do hear this again, that any movement towards self-care is taking you towards home. The movements away from it are pulling you away from home. And you may hear that and then still scroll through Netflix for the next 3 hours after this Dharma talk. That might happen to you, but you'll be doing it aware that, oh, I'm taking myself away from home. Perhaps you can add to that thought, because having lost my sense of home is so painful. I'm trying to numb that pain. I don't quite know what else to do. But slowly yoga and Sangha community will help with that. We can feel so tired, right? Or so anxious or so fatigued from all the physical efforts in the life and the way the mind is harassing the body that we may sometimes just go to numbing or distancing from ourselves. But now, having been here for this Dharma time, you'll hear my words that you're moving away from home, not towards it. May that be poignantly painful in a good way to have a sense of that. So our duty, then, we could say, in society, particularly as we look at the climate situation, if we look through the lens of the koshas, a duty would be to get back home to that Ananda Maya Kosha, because we'll sense the earth and her elements and all of the creatures and all of the people. We're going to sense our responsibility, as I like to say, for everything and everyone. We're going to sense it from a place that's compassionate and slowed down. It's kind of taking it in. And we may have then the fortitude to feel both the sorrow and the possibilities. Now, of course, people will feel we don't have time for getting back home to that Ananda Maya Kosha because so much has to be done. We have to plant trees and reduce carbon emissions and go to activism things, and we should be voting. And for sure, we will discuss this in the climate awareness group on Sunday of this weekend. We do need to be voting. We do need to pay attention. It is helpful to, civil disobedience is one of the best ways to change a society. It's been shown again and again. One of the people that I follow in the climate movement is Roger Hallam. He's a expert at talking about that, civil disobedience. If we're going to sustain that kind of involvement to help the climate, we need to know where home is. And as I said before, that's really important because for those of us who want to act for the greater good in society, if we burn out or become hardened or too much residue, if we get ill because we're doing the work without caring for our sense of home, then we don't have the longevity that might be necessary. So this is really key. Second thing, at the Vijnana Maya Kosha, if we can turn more often to this collective wisdom, share it, bring it forth, talk about it with people who are meaningful to you, remember it yourself. It's going to help be a guiding force for when you get to the Manomaya Kosha, and that is the mind, where we all individually and collectively would benefit greatly from some mental updates. Like even at the level of the mind, the things that it needs things, the greed and the need that our minds are compelled to repeat again and again. You'll start to see that it's much less necessary. It causes you tension, and it's perpetuating the climate catastrophe. And by that, I mean our need and greed in the global north, that's where we live, in the dominant culture, which most of us here are a part of. Some of us are not, but most of us are. We are conditioned to buy more things and to feel that we deserve those things. In fact, those things are considered rewards sometimes, rewards for how hard we worked. And yet some of our purchases and the numbers of purchases, we say actually in Buddhism and yoga that kind of wanting, that craving, and even that possessing of those things, those are forms of suffering. If you look at it on a climate level, that purchasing is often exploiting labor somewhere else on the planet or resources somewhere else on the planet. And then it's often using jet fuel to get that thing to you. And so you start to look at it, if you've been to the Anandamaya Kosha, you've been in Vijnana Maya Kosha, you start looking at your mind, wanting these things, and you can't not know that children are making that in another part of the planet, or they're climbing into mines to get these minerals to create these products. And those things have to be crafted, packaged, marketed, sent. So much is involved in that you start seeing through it and you say, oh, I don't need to purchase that because it comes with all of that other stuff. I don't want that thing. I'll find another way, for example. It's very difficult to know for some of your purchases, but if you do come to that Anandamaya and Vijnanamaya, when you approach the moment of a decision, you come with a more clear mind. And you can think of even your momentary choice as a climate choice, a climate action. And from that place, as the mind has less greed and need, we start to move into the Pancha Maya Kosha, feeling more spacious, actually, less burdened. And that will ripple into the Annamaya Kosha, the physical body as well. So if we go from the centermost and we don't forget that sense of home, we don't forget the collective wisdom, we're going to start seeing our mind, and it's going to feel like you're at the, where you go to the card shop. Maybe you don't buy cards anymore, but remember back when there used to be card shops, and you go in and there's like hundreds of cards and they have categories and such. And if you just stand in there, you're like, oh my God, how am I going to pick a card? Some people go to those card aisles for hours. They're there for hours. Some of the cards are funny. It's fun to read them. Some people are painstaking looking just for the right card to look for. If you think about that and you amplify that exponentially, that is like the mind, those numbers of categories and those numbers of thoughts, and that amount of fascination with some of those thoughts, and looking for the right thought, or just feeling you have a problematic thought. You could get lost in the card aisle. You could get lost in your own mind. So when you come to the Pancha Maya Kosha, from having gotten that sense of home and wisdom, some of your thoughts are going to just like fall away like dust bunnies. You'll be like, how did I ever even have that thought so often? That thought is no longer so believable. It's easier with little thoughts. For example, this might not be a little thought for some of you, but was not always a little thought for me either, but the thought, I have to get it all done. No, you don't. If no one's told you that yet, please let me tell you, no, you don't. You cannot get it all done. You don't have to get it all done. It will never be all done. But the part of the mind that thinks I have to get it all done keeps adding to the bottom of the to-do list as you're crossing it off from the top. And writing a new piece of clean words on a blank page, that's a habit that people have because it's going to feel more organized. But that keeps happening. So the thought, I have to get it all done, could be addressed. And then a thoughtful, balanced approach to the things that are actually yours to do can be created. But if we're driven by the thought, I have to get it all done, which, by the way, is a survival thought. I mentioned earlier, these are from survival. It's a survival thought. It's based on anxiety. And it has a history in how you were seen or not seen as a very young person in your developing years. So each of those thoughts in the Pancha Maya Kosha that has that kind of tone, like I have to get it all done, or nobody likes me. If they really knew me, they wouldn't like me. Those kinds of thoughts have their history in your developmental years. And they seem very believable initially. When you're practicing yoga, they'll start to seem less and less believable, but they seem very believable. And they not only are tied to this history of not being seen clearly, and then not being able to see yourself clearly, they become kind of congealed together in this layer of shame, where we feel like we must keep acting or experience shame. We must keep doing or experience shame. We should be more productive or experience shame, or we should not speak up or be too loud or be too much or experience shame. It's very conflicted. We should both be doing more and then also not showing so much of ourselves. And there's other ways that shame manifests as well, but not our entire topic for this evening. But notice that you cannot really whittle away at shame, just like trying to attack it. But if you got back home to Ananda and Vijnanamaya, when you then approach a thought like, I shouldn't have said that at the party. Why did I say that? Oh God, why did I text that thing to that person? I'm so embarrassed. I'm so dumb. So it turns into this whole thing of shame. When you visited home and wisdom, you can come to that same thought like, well, I did it and it's over, and I can tolerate some embarrassment. And if I have genuine regret, I can make amends. I can do something about it. And was it really so terrible? And really, if I put that in the spectrum of my life, do I want to hold that one? So you can start approaching the thought. You approach it from the inside of the koshas, not from the outside, where you're trying to get rid of it because it's so problematic. So if you're trying to push it back down into the jack in the box, but life keeps cranking the arm on the jack in the box and it keeps popping back up to you. So to come from the innermost to touch these thoughts, it actually feels easier to dismantle them. We use this word dismantling a lot in dismantling racism and other isms. It's very hard to dismantle anything if you're trying to attack it from the outside. So for me, the thought, just tonight's example, I have to get it all done, was tied to having rewards, being rewarded for being a good student or being competent or cleaning my room or doing the things that kept me out of harm's way. I'm sure you can trace your own thoughts back. It was connected to rewards and safety. But it was exhausting. And it was very freeing to realize that it couldn't possibly happen and that that's forgivable. And I like sometimes when words are rhyming, because the thought, I have to get it all done, can't really do that, I'm not going to succeed at that, it's totally forgivable. In fact, it's a more livable way to be. So you can right size, I like this phrase, you can right size your responsibilities and right size these thoughts. And this will flow outwards into your energy body, your nervous system body, and it will flow further outwards into your physical body. And as that's happening, you're going to start sensing your Pancha Maya Kosha is deeply tied to nature. And you will know yourself in nature to feel like, oh, this is where we came from. We are expressions of nature. And she is our most profound duty. And that includes everything and everyone. We start to align our lives with different priorities and values because we feel it from the inside out. It will not be a linear line, right? You're going to have detours and speed bumps and potholes, but you can keep going in this direction more likely if we have support, if we are, as I said, in a community. Any questions that want to be asked at this juncture? Or comments or reflections, additions, disagreements, confessions? I'm sorry I don't have more light on my face here. I don't want to turn it on because, well, for one, it's difficult for my concussion. I have light sensitivity. And secondly, I'd have to get up to go turn it on, and I feel like it kind of breaks my connection with you. So we will live with it.
Oh,
Go
sorry.
ahead. Yeah,
I
Nicole.
could ask a question. I was wondering if I was kind of thinking about saving it for the climate group on Sunday, but you mentioned right size my responsibilities, which helped me because I started getting into this like spiral, like judging myself about like all the electronics I have purchased and all the ways that I have contributed to like inhumane practices. But then I'm wondering what you think about, like, I've heard a lot of people say, like you said it, we are expressions of nature, but I feel like when you say nature, you mean something specific. And what I've heard some people say is like, because we are expressions of nature, then like cities and pollution and everything that we've created can also by extension be considered nature. But it sounds like you've been separating it into something different. And sort of, I'm wondering if there's a value judgment there on things that we've created versus things that we didn't.
Yes, that's a great question. Beautifully said. And I love your awareness of yourself, where you said you've participated in some inhumane activities and you recognize now. You probably didn't have the awareness before some of those activities, but looking in our rearview mirrors, appropriate regret leads to making amends. Shame does not. If we feel shame about things, we become frozen and more likely to porcupine, right? we can become frozen and immobilized, or we can start fighting against the shame. So when you have appropriate regret or remorse, that's a very healthy sign, Nicole. You did sense a little shame there came up, so I just wanted to put those two as they're distinct. Regret, appropriate regret, remorse, and appropriate guilt lead us to take action. Shame paralyzes us or causes us to go into denial and then fight against it. So I think it's very healthy that you can see those two things are occurring. If you look at the charts about our climate, and you look particularly when post-industrialized societies started to come into fashion, as it were, that post-industrialized living has had such a negative and fast-acting impact on the climate and the ecology. And much of that is about an infinite growth mindset on a finite planet. And it's about more is better, including having more resources, and that those who have the power for the resources get to have them. So those particular constructs, more is better, and those who have more power get to have them, those are man-made thoughts and constructions of being in this species, part of the human condition, as we say. But as those thoughts took over and we shifted society, even from hunter-gatherer to being able to settle somewhere and be more of an agrarian society, that also had an impact. But as we shifted into this industrialized society, we colonized our own minds with thoughts of like, I need more and I deserve more. And in fact, I can have more because it's being provided to me in all these ways that more is better. And I would say that in terms of that process, then taking over our own minds, that's what I'm saying, it colonized our minds. It's very hard for some people to get out of that. They need a boat, a car, a house, another thing, and they have an RV parked somewhere that they only use once a year. I mean, so many things that we have. So to come to your question, Nicole, I consider those to be constructed by the mind patterns that we can have as a human species. I don't see that in nature, there's a mechanism that says some species should have more and some should have less, and the species should gather together to be more possessive of resources. I do see that nature takes care of itself, and when, for example, when there's an overpopulation of deer, something happens and it repopulates itself in a different way. When natural forest fire events happen, it's like nature is taking care of itself in this way. But we've intervened and interrupted and intruded so badly. We often don't know what nature would do now. How is that landing for you, what I'm saying?
Well, I guess if that's an appropriate word for it, it's landing. But I got curious about the role in acceptance in all this, because I'm struggling with that at work too. And that kind of happened this week, where I've been advocating for things I believe in and getting a lot of pushback all year. And realizing that I do need to accept what I can't control, but then also not fall into like, blanking on the word.
Apathy.
Yeah.
Would that be
Resignation.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So like just I know that they are supposed to both exist. And I know mindfulness is holding seemingly opposite things, but they do feel I'm really struggling with how to accept and do what I can at the same time. So
Yeah, that's really helpful. When we're in a little bit of friction, or maybe even a lot of friction sometimes, about this concept of acceptance, we probably have some of our own historical, personal held trauma to work with. It's because it's highly impossible that something that's happening in the present moment for us that's causing contraction would not have any of our history in it. So one avenue there is to think, oh, I'm having this huge contraction. I really wish the situation were different. I wish those people were different. I wish the circumstances were different. I wish I could make a better outcome here. So when all that is occurring, that friction or contraction, let's have a little hypothesis that our history is activated. And one pathway for us is to look into that history and seek some personal resolution about where that comes from, so that we can lessen the likelihood of being, pardon the phrase, I hope it's okay, it's not just directed at Nicole, but can we lessen the likelihood of being an angry activist? Is it necessary to be enraged as an activist? It's necessary to be outraged sometimes to get things done, but is an angry activist going to be the best way to help other people transform how they're seeing circumstances or situations? So one path is personal, Nicole. We look and see, my contraction is so strong right now. I have to check my Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manamaya Kosha myself so I can get back home to Anandamaya Kosha. But a second path of consideration here is the friction is between me and others. We're not sharing a perspective. Am I forgetting what their inner nature truly is? Do I see them only as the limitations I put on them, which might be their perspectives or their like political leanings? Have I forgotten their inner nature? Am I forgetting my own? Can I practice remembering that they're trying to meet needs just like I am? And basically try to connect to the part of them driven by need. And maybe we can come to some curiosity about what those needs are. And then we may be having a conversation with people versus just a conflict with them. You're smiling. Is that touching you somehow?
Yeah, it's just funny because that's what I'm advocating for.
Oh.
So like restorative justice and trauma-informed practices at our school, and I'm getting a lot of resistance. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
So a third consideration then is that whatever we have in us that is unresolved that we bring to that moment, the other people might energetically, so their Manamaya Kosha and their Pranamaya Kosha may be energetically pinging off of our approach, right? So we might be broadcasting something we're not aware of because it's in our nonverbal or invisible matrix. They're picking up on it and we're picking up on theirs, right? You know, when somebody walks into the room that you have conflict with, how you feel like, ooh, here's that person. Like your nervous system changes, our body language changes. So it's possible that your particular wounds and their particular wounds are in friction to play something out, maybe even at the soul level. I couldn't say because I don't know these people, but I'm almost certain that they're picking up on what you're bringing to it and you're picking up on what they're bringing to it. And then
it could also be just the content that is uncomfortable. It's triggering something, for whatever reason.
Yeah.
No matter how I approach it, it's not, they've got their own stuff too. So
Yes, yeah. And so that goes back to the trauma informed that you want to bring to people. So when I'm saying like we might be bringing some energy to it, a deep desire for them to get it is one way we bring energy to it. And that might be like a positive ambiance from you, but for their trauma history or their nervous system, your deep desire for them to get it is aversive, even if it's beautiful. Like my deep desire to make change in the prison system is not welcomed by everybody there. So it's, even though it's like a positive expression from me, and you may have also this positive expression that you're bringing to it, that might be aversive to somebody else because their trauma or history conditions them to find suspicion in that or to find aversion in that. So it's like a delicate dance, a little bit like Aikido, this Aikido kind of practice. It's a delicate dance of sensing. I often say it like this, Nicole. The person who has more self-awareness is a little bit more resourced than the person who doesn't. And the more resourced person has to apply some delicate leadership there. And so we try to find, how can I match myself a little bit more to the friction they're providing, come to understand it. And then it's almost like mediation. How can I understand it? So we could come to see, we want to meet mutual needs and have a less friction-filled conversation. You following that okay? Does it sound exhausting right now?
yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah. So this is why we need our daily practices to be the more and more resourced version of ourselves. And I've lived through some times, Nicole, so I'll offer this perspective that sometimes I felt resentful, like, why do I have to be the more resourced person around here? Well, you know what? That was my childhood. I mean, really, fundamentally, why do I have to be the more resourced person around here? My siblings won't eat if I don't, that, or there's not going to be food. So Let's look at those thoughts when they come, Nicole. That was one of mine. Let's look at it and think, how far back does that go? That thought. And hold ourselves kindly when that happens. I'm going to go to Ellen.
This last part that you just said made me think of this major aha moment I had yesterday. Being the more resource person and sometimes the resentment that can happen because you have to do it. And I realized yesterday that so much of my resentment in some of those situations comes from my identification with being in a certain role. And then therefore my attachment to the expectations I have for me to be in my role, for them to be in theirs, and for us to play the part appropriately. And I know that this is a family of origin issue. I'm the one who is resourced in my family. And I have a very estranged, just you'll get to know me, but estranged situation with my parents. And I'm looking for, I know what I'm doing right now is I needed the space for some of the drama that kicked up, that I needed space to figure out how I could not be angry with them. And I realized that my attachment to them being a parent or grandparent was putting them in a position that they could not do. And I was always making them angry, not being the daughter that they wanted, the one who would be subservient and submissive and make them happy, right? This is a very like narcissistic kind of a codependent environment I was raised in. And so last night I was talking to my husband and I was like, it's the role identification. If I no longer attach my need to have a parent or a grandparent. So this could be like a really obnoxious colleague. It could be a tenuous situation at work. It could be anywhere where we've identified role and then not disassociate, but become non-attached is like kind of what I've been thinking of. And I realized I was like, that would be my avenue to find compassion, because then I could be me, which I feel like is what we're talking about with the Ananda, I don't know how to say it, but that one.
Ananda.
Ananda. I could be sitting there when I don't have role attachment. And it's in a day where I've done my yoga and I've eaten well and I've had all the things. And then I can hold space for compassion because I do deeply love my family, but I do not have a good relationship with them. And they are in their own sort of cycles of chaos, which make it very difficult. And but to be able to sit and see without getting lost in their grief, and then therefore lost in my grief about it because of the role and the expectation, which is creating the grief because of the expectation, I can find more space. I hope that's making sense, but that was my major aha yesterday.
Yes. It is a major aha, and it made a lot of sense as you were communicating it. And something that we come often to be surprised by is our transformation of these things is not dependent on the other person changing. And our transformation may not change them. It may not become reciprocal. The likelihood of it becoming reciprocal exists. I mean, not in an explicit verbal sense, like if I transform myself, they too shall be transformed. Therefore, I will go with my agenda to transform myself, to transform them, and then I'm still in the same quagmire. But when you are more and more free like that, what we call this in my work, particularly in my addiction recovery work and in hunger, hope, and healing, we call this differentiation and inner sovereignty. And you're differentiating yourself from the family that raised you, from the care providing environment that heavily conditioned you. Particularly, it sounds like you might have a narcissistic thing happening in that family. As you differentiate, you get to see the patterns that are playing out there, almost like you're watching a movie. And you can see like the characters, you can start imagining the histories that created them and the history before that history. And we do start to see with a lot more love and spaciousness. We may also still create very clear boundaries about time, resources, contact, communication, activities. We can have very clear boundaries with a lot of compassion. How does that sound?
I mean, that's literally the work.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, you got a chat from somebody who appreciated your comments. And also, Nicole, I saw your thank you in the chat there too. I appreciate that as well. Yeah. So if we were to picture that which we're still carrying from our own wounding as like key aspects of our healing, it then becomes the healing of the whole, right? It goes into the way we relate to the climate, the way we relate to each other, the way we relate to the powers that be, and the way we want to help empower those that could come into more power and leadership. It changes everything. So keeping that in mind, let's close here. We're near to our agreed upon time for closing, but let's close with a minute of silence together. And what I'll suggest is that when you sit, please sit upright, and then imagine this sort of bi-directional pathway with these koshas. So come to your upright seat. Allow your breath to help you find your sense of center, like a vertical plumb line. We know that the inhale is intrinsically expansive. So picture from the downbeat of the inhale, you're connected to Pancha Maya Kosha, and that fills out the Vijnanamaya, Manomaya, Pranamaya, Annamaya. On the exhale, you're returning Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manomaya, Vijnanamaya, Anandamaya. And as you breathe, imagine that everything in nature is playing its part. We're breathing in, we're breathing out. Plants, animals, the elements. Everything is interconnected. Appreciation for the opportunity to sense this in yourself. Please raise your hands to your heart. And so gratitude that we could come together as a community. Thank you very much for being here. Namaste. Thank you also to my teachers and my teachers' teachers. And for those of you who are here with us for training, I will see you in the morning for the very important pranayama and meditation practice that brings you to that ananda so gently, so gracefully. See you then. Thank you, everyone. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It helps us to keep producing content for you. Also click like on videos that are helpful to you. It's good feedback for me and for the other teachers. And let us know if you have any questions or comments below the videos, including if you've got questions about yoga teacher training. Go ahead and leave a question for that. We'll be able to pick it up from there and get in touch with you. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Take care.